The scent of lemon polish and old well-loved wood was the first thing that always greeted me when I came home. It was the smell of my life with Frank. We'd built this house from the ground up, not just with lumber and nails, but with 47 years of laughter, a few tears, and countless shared dreams. Every corner held a memory. The faint scratch on the hardwood floor by the fireplace was from when our son David was 5 and tried to ride his new tricycle indoors. The towering oak tree in the front yard, now a giant whose branches shaded the whole lawn, was a sapling we'd planted on our first anniversary. This house wasn't just 4 walls and a roof. It was the physical manifestation of our family's history, and since Frank passed 3 years ago, it was my sanctuary, my fortress of solitude and memory. So, when I decided to take my first real trip since his passing, a simple week-long bus tour to see the New England fall colors with my sister Margaret, leaving the house was the hardest part. David, my only son, had been insistent. "Mom, you can't just leave the place empty for a week," he'd said over our Sunday dinner, his wife Susan, nodding vigorously beside him. "You know how things are these days. Let us stay over. We'll keep an eye on everything, water the plants, collect the mail. It'll be like we're not even here." I hesitated. David was a good son, for the most part, but he had a certain carelessness about him, a trait magnified by Susan's breezy, modern attitude that often grated on my more traditional nerves. They saw the world as something to be consumed and discarded, while I saw it as something to be cared for and preserved. "I don't know, David," I said, looking down at my hands. "It's a lot to ask." "And you have your own home!" Susan jumped in, her voice bright and a little too loud. "Oh, nonsense, Carol, it's no trouble at all. Besides, the kids would love a sleepover at Grandma's. It'll be a fun little staycation for them." She meant our grandchildren, 17-year-old Kyle and 15-year-old Jenna. The thought of teenagers in my house, unsupervised, sent a small shiver of apprehension down my spine. "There will be no parties, David," I said, my voice firm as I looked him directly in the eye. "I mean it. This isn't a frat house. This is my home." He put on his most charming, reassuring smile, the one that had gotten him out of trouble since he was a boy. "Mom, of course not. What do you take me for? We'll be perfect angels. We'll guard this place like it's Fort Knox. You just go have fun with Aunt Margaret. You deserve it." Against my better judgment, I relented. He was my son, after all, and the thought of the house sitting empty and silent did worry me. I handed him the spare key, a weight transferring from my hand to his that felt far heavier than a small piece of brass. I gave them a detailed tour of what needed watering, which thermostat setting to use, and how to jiggle the handle on the guest toilet. I pointed to the curio cabinet filled with my mother's porcelain birds. "Be especially careful around this," I'd said, my voice soft. "It's all I have left of her." Susan had patted my arm. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about a thing, Carol. It's all just stuff. We'll be careful." The phrase hung in the air, smelling more sterile and wrong than the lemon polish ever could. But I pushed the feeling down. I had to trust them. They were my family. The week in New England was a balm for my soul. The fiery reds of the maples and the brilliant yellows of the birches were like a final, glorious celebration before the quiet of winter. Margaret and I talked for hours, reminiscing about our childhoods, about Frank, about the lives we had lived. It was a good trip, but by the 7th day, I was eager to be home. I missed the familiar comfort of my own bed, the specific weight of the quilt Frank and I had picked out together, and the quiet ritual of my morning coffee in the sunroom. The bus dropped me off at the terminal, and I took a taxi home, a small, happy hum in my chest. As the taxi turned onto my street, that hum died in my throat. Something was wrong. From a block away, I could see it. The lawn, my meticulously cared-for lawn, was ravaged. There were muddy tire tracks gouged into the grass, leading from the street right up to the front porch steps. A flattened pizza box lay forlornly in the middle of a rose bush. My stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot. I paid the driver, my hands trembling as I fumbled with my wallet. He gave me a sympathetic look. "Big party, ma'am?" he asked. I didn't answer. I pulled my suitcase up the walkway, my eyes cataloging the desecration. Beer bottle caps glinted in the grass like malevolent little eyes. A red plastic cup was impaled on the white picket fence. My heart was pounding against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I reached the front door and found it slightly ajar. I pushed it open, and the smell hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't the clean, comforting scent of lemon and old wood. It was a vile cocktail of stale beer, cigarette smoke, and something else. Something sickly sweet and vaguely like vomit. I stepped inside and my breath caught. It was worse, so much worse than I could have imagined. The living room, my beautiful living room, looked like a hurricane had passed through it. Cushions were torn from the sofa, their stuffing peeking out like wounded flesh. A dark, sticky-looking puddle of what I prayed was soda soaked into the center of my cream-colored Persian rug, a wedding gift from my parents. The coffee table that Frank had built with his own 2 hands, the one he'd spent a month sanding and staining to a perfect finish, was covered in white rings from wet glasses, and, to my horror, a long black cigarette burn gouged into the wood. My eyes scanned the room in a daze, taking in the full scope of the disaster. An empty liquor bottle lay on its side, a crack spiderwebbing across its label. Greasy fingerprints smeared the family photos on the mantel. And then I saw it. The curio cabinet. The glass door was shattered, hanging from a single hinge. Inside, on the velvet-lined shelves, lay the glittering shards of my mother's porcelain birds. The delicate bluebird, the cheerful robin, the elegant swan, all of them smashed into 1,000 tiny, unfixable pieces. A sound escaped my lips, a pained gasp that was half sob, half cry of outrage. I sank onto the edge of a non-sticky part of the sofa, the one piece of furniture that wasn't overturned, and just stared. The silence of the house was no longer peaceful. It was accusatory. It screamed of betrayal. My sanctuary had been violated. My fortress had been breached. And my own family had handed over the keys to the invaders. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, surrounded by the ghost of a party I hadn't attended and the ruins of a home I no longer recognized. The initial shock began to crystallize into a cold, diamond-hard fury. I didn't cry. The hurt was too deep for tears. It was a wound that had cauterized itself shut with anger. I pulled out my phone, my thumbs shaking as I navigated to David's contact. I didn't even have to press call. A text from him, sent an hour earlier, lit up the screen. "Hey Mom, hope you had a great trip. We're back at our place. House is all good? Talk soon." All good. The lie was so blatant, so audacious, it stole my breath. Did he think I was blind or senile? Did he think I wouldn't notice? I typed a simple, ice-cold reply. "Get over here. Now." 15 minutes later, his car pulled into the driveway, its tires crunching over what sounded like a broken bottle. David and Susan came through the door, their faces arranged in masks of bright, feigned innocence. The masks melted the second they saw me sitting there, amidst the wreckage. David's eyes widened. "Oh, wow," he said, his voice a weak whisper. It looks a little worse than I thought." Susan, however, went on the offensive. She put her hands on her hips, surveying the room with a critical eye, as if she were a guest at a poorly managed hotel. "Well, Kyle is grounded until he's 30, she announced with a sigh that was more performative than genuine. "He said a few friends were coming over to study. Teenagers, you know how they are. They get out of hand so fast." A few friends. To study. The excuse was so flimsy, so insulting to my intelligence, that I felt a fresh wave of rage wash over me. I stood up slowly, my joints aching with a weariness that had nothing to do with my trip. I pointed a trembling finger at the burn mark on Frank's coffee table. "And what about this, Susan? Was that part of their study group?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "And my mother's birds? Did they help with their history final?" David stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Mom, listen, we are so sorry. We'll clean it all up, I promise. We'll hire a professional cleaning crew, we'll get the rug shampooed, whatever it takes. We'll fix it." But his words were hollow. He wasn't sorry for the desecration. He was sorry he'd been caught. He was sorry for the inconvenience. And then Susan delivered the line that would shatter the last remaining fragment of my affection for them. She waved a dismissive hand at the chaos, a small, tight smile on her lips. "Oh, Carol, relax. We said we'll handle it. At the end of the day, it's just stuff. It can all be replaced." "It's just stuff." The words echoed in the trashed room, more destructive than any thrown bottle or spilled drink. My home, my memories, Frank's hard work, my mother's legacy, all of it reduced to just stuff. I looked from her smug face to my son's, who was pointedly avoiding my gaze, implicitly agreeing with his wife. In that moment, something inside me broke. The bond of love and familial duty that had tied me to them for my entire life snapped with a resounding crack that only I could hear. They didn't see a home. They saw a property. They didn't see a legacy. They saw an inheritance. They didn't see me, a grieving widow cherishing her memories. They saw a doddering old woman, a placeholder, whose feelings about her stuff were an inconvenient obstacle. I stared at them, my face a blank mask. "Get out," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of all emotion. "What?" David asked, blinking. "Get out of my house." They left. After a few more pathetic attempts at apologies and promises, they scurried out of the wreckage they had created, leaving me alone in the stinking, silent house. I didn't move for a long time. I just stood in the center of the living room, a solitary statue in a museum of disrespect. The night fell, but I didn't turn on any lights. The darkness felt appropriate, a shroud for the home that had, in a way, died that day. I wandered through the rooms, my feet crunching on unseen debris. I ran my hand over the deep gouge in the coffee table, a scar on the memory of my husband's loving labor. I picked up a single, sharp shard of blue porcelain, all that was left of my mother's favorite bluebird. It wasn't just stuff, it was the physical anchor for my memories. Without Frank here, these objects, this house, were my connection to him. They were the stories I could no longer hear him tell, the jokes I could no longer hear him laugh at. That coffee table wasn't just wood. It was the Sunday morning spent doing crosswords, the countless cups of tea we'd shared while discussing our days. The Persian rug wasn't just wool and thread. It was the floor where David took his first steps, where we'd laid on our backs watching the fire on cold winter nights. My family didn't understand that. To them, it was all just potential value, an asset. A house they were patiently waiting to inherit so they could gut it, paint it a fashionable gray, and flip it for a profit. Their carelessness wasn't just a youthful mistake or a party that got out of hand. It was a profound statement of their values. They saw the house not as a home to be cherished, but as a future paycheck they felt entitled to. And by extension, they saw me not as their mother and grandmother, but as the temporary warden of their property. Susan's words, "It's just stuff," played on a loop in my mind. The more I thought about them, the less they sounded like an insult, and the more they sounded like a justification. A justification for their impatience, their greed, their utter lack of respect for anything that wasn't shiny, new, and theirs. They had already mentally taken possession of my home. The party wasn't a mistake. It was an act of ownership. They were treating it like their own playground because, in their minds, it already was. A slow, cold resolve began to form in the pit of my stomach. It started as a tiny, rebellious spark and grew steadily into a raging fire. They thought my home was a disposable asset? They thought my life's work was just stuff? Fine. I would treat it exactly as they did. They had judged my home and everything in it as temporary and replaceable. Very well. I would show them just how temporary it could be. I walked over to the bay window, looking out at the darkened, wounded lawn. The giant oak tree, Frank's oak tree, stood silhouetted against the weak glow of the streetlights, its branches like steady, reassuring arms. It was the only thing they hadn't managed to damage. It was a survivor. And so was I. I took a deep breath, the foul air of the room filling my lungs one last time. I would not clean their mess. I would not repair their damage. They saw the house as a commodity to be sold. So a commodity it would be. I would sell it. I would take the one thing they were so certain was their future, and I would turn it into my present, my freedom. The next morning, I woke up on the sofa, a crick in my neck and a steel rod for a spine. The morning light streamed in, illuminating the full, sordid horror of the living room in merciless detail. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams over sticky patches and glittery shards of glass. For a moment, a wave of overwhelming grief washed over me. The sheer effort of packing up a lifetime of memories, of leaving this place, felt monumental, impossible. Then I remembered Susan's smug face and David's averted eyes, and the grief was instantly burned away by the cold fire of my resolve. I didn't bother making coffee. The kitchen was in a similar, though less catastrophic, state of disarray. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, pulling out the old-fashioned phone book. My fingers, surprisingly steady, flipped through the yellowed pages to the R section. Realtors. I ignored the big flashy ads for the national chains. I was looking for a local name. Someone who knew this town. Someone who might understand what a house like this meant. I found a small, independent agency run by a woman named Sarah Gable. Her ad was simple, professional, and had a picture of a woman with kind, intelligent eyes. I dialed the number before I could second-guess myself. A calm, pleasant voice answered. "Gable Realty, this is Sarah speaking." "Hello, Sarah," I said, my own voice sounding foreign to my ears, hard and businesslike. "My name is Carol Miller. I'd like to sell my house." There was a brief pause on the other end. "Of course, Mrs. Miller. I'd be happy to help. I know the houses on Oak Street well. Beautiful properties. When would be a good time for me to come by and do a walkthrough, discuss a listing price?" Here it was, the moment of truth. "You can come by this morning if you're free," I said. "But I need to be very clear about two things. First, I want to sell it quickly. I'm not interested in waiting for the perfect offer. I'm interested in a fast, clean sale." "I understand," Sarah said, a note of professional curiosity in her voice. "We can certainly price it to move. And the second thing?" I took a deep breath. "The second thing is that I'm selling it as is." Another pause, this one longer. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. "As is?" she repeated carefully. "You mean you're not planning on doing any pre-sale repairs or updates?" "I mean," I clarified, my gaze sweeping over the trashed living room, "I am not touching a single thing. I will not be picking up a bottle, cleaning a stain, or repairing a goddamn thing. The buyers will get the house in the exact condition it is in right at this moment. The price should reflect that." To her credit, Sarah didn't ask the dozen questions that were probably on her mind. There was no judgment in her voice, only a quiet professionalism that I found immensely comforting. "All right, Mrs. Miller," she said, her tone decisive. "I have a cancellation at 11 this morning. I can be there in an hour. Will that work for you?" "That will be perfect," I said, and hung up the phone. I had done it. I had set the wheels in motion. For the first time since walking through that door, I felt a sliver of power return to me. They wanted to treat my home like a dump. Fine. I would sell the dump. And I wouldn't even give them the satisfaction of me cleaning up their mess. Sarah Gable was exactly what her picture suggested. Professional, sharp, and with an empathy that didn't cross the line into pity. When I opened the door for her, I didn't offer any excuses for the state of the house. I just stepped aside and let her see. She walked into the living room, her sensible heels silent on the gritty floor, and her eyes widened almost imperceptibly. She took a slow 360-degree tour of the room, her expression unreadable. She peered at the burn on the coffee table and glanced at the shattered curio cabinet. She didn't say, "What on earth happened here?" or, "Oh, you poor thing." She just took out a notepad and a pen. "Okay," she said, clicking the pen. "As is." We walked through the rest of the house. The trail of destruction was less severe in other rooms, but it was present everywhere. A dirty towel left in a sink, a suspicious stain on a bedroom carpet, an overflowing trash can in the kitchen. I felt a flush of shame, but I pushed it down. This was not my shame. It was theirs. Back in the relative calm of the sunroom, Sarah sat down and looked at me directly. "Carol," she said, using my first name for the first time, "you know that selling a house in this condition will significantly impact the price. We're probably talking 25, maybe 30% below market value for a home in pristine condition on this street." "I'm aware," I said calmly. "My son and his wife told me that it's all just stuff. So, I'm treating it like stuff. The money isn't the point. The principle is?" A look of complete understanding dawned on her face. She nodded slowly, a small, sad smile touching her lips. "I see," she said. "Well, in that case, it's a very clear-cut proposition. We list it as a handyman special or an investor's dream. We highlight the good bones of the house, the location, the beautiful yard. We'll be honest about the condition. We'll get offers, and there'll be cash offers from flippers who will close in 2 weeks." It was perfect. Faster and more final than I could have hoped for. "Draw up the paperwork," I said. 2 days later, a man came and hammered a sign into my wounded front lawn. It was a bright, bold red and white. "For sale, Gable Realty." Underneath, a smaller sign was attached, "Sold." Sarah had been as good as her word. A local investor had seen the listing online, driven by, peeked in the windows, and made a cash offer that afternoon without even stepping inside. It was low, just as she'd predicted, but it was clean and fast. The closing was in 10 days. I stood at the window, watching the man hammer the sign in, and my phone began to ring. It was David. I knew, with absolute certainty, that he was on his way home from work and had just turned onto our street. I let it ring for a moment, savoring the sound, then answered. "Hello, David." His voice was a choked, incredulous squawk. "Mom? What the hell is going on? There's a sold sign on your lawn. Is this a joke?" "What did you do?" I felt a strange calm settle over me, a peace I hadn't felt in days. "I did exactly what you and Susan suggested, dear," I said, my voice as smooth as glass. "I'm treating it like stuff. It seems someone else wanted the stuff more than you did." There was a sputtering on the other end of the line. "You can't do that. That's our house. Dad wanted me to have that house." You're just giving it away." "Oh, I'm not giving it away, David. I'm selling it. For quite a tidy sum, actually. And you were the one who taught me its value. It's a disposable party venue. It's an asset to be liquidated. And most importantly, it's just stuff." The silence on the other end of the line was so profound I could hear the hum of his car's engine. When David finally spoke, his voice was no longer just shocked, it was venomous. "You've lost your mind," he spat. "She's finally lost it, Susan," I heard him say, his voice muffled as he turned from the phone. Then back to me. "We're coming over there, and we're calling a lawyer. You're clearly not competent to make decisions like this anymore. This is elder abuse. You're being manipulated by that realtor." I almost laughed. It was so perfectly, predictably him. When his charm failed, he turned to threats and accusations. When he didn't get his way, the other person must be crazy. "Don't bother coming over, David," I said, my voice still level and calm. That, I knew, would infuriate him more than any screaming match. "There's nothing to discuss. The papers are signed. It's a done deal. And as for my competence, I have never felt more clear-headed in my entire life. I am simply taking you at your word." "My word? What are you talking about?" he yelled, his voice cracking with panic and rage. "You told me this house, my home, the place your father and I poured our lives into, was just stuff. You showed me, with your actions, that it was a place to be used and discarded. You saw its value only in terms of the money you would get when I was gone. So I decided to cut out the middleman. You wanted the house for its cash value? Well, I'm the one who's getting the cash." "You just get the lesson!" I could hear Susan's shrill voice in the background, a furious wasp buzzing. "Tell her she can't! Tell her Dad's will—" "Dad's will?" I interjected, cutting David off before he could relay the message. "Frank's will left everything to me, David, to me. For me to live in, to care for, and to do with as I saw fit. It was my property. The idea that it would automatically pass to you was always just a pleasant assumption on your part. An assumption you and your wife have proven you are not worthy of." "Worthy!" he shrieked. "This isn't about being worthy. This is about family. This is about my inheritance." "Your inheritance," I said softly, the finality of it settling into my bones, "was a lifetime of love, a home you were always welcome in, and memories you could cherish. You trashed it. You treated the love as an obligation and the home as a flophouse. You don't get to complain about losing the cash equivalent when you so carelessly threw away the real thing." I paused, then delivered the final blow. "You said to relax. So relax, David. After all, it's just a house." Before he could respond, I ended the call. I then blocked his number and Susan's. I didn't need to hear another word. The silence that followed was the most peaceful sound I had ever heard. I had taken their disrespect, their entitlement, their condescending dismissal of my entire life, and I had returned it to them in the only language they seemed to understand. Money. They had treated my sanctuary like a disposable object, so I had disposed of it. And in doing so, I had taken back my power, my dignity, and my peace of mind. The 10 days before the closing were a whirlwind of activity, but it was a cleansing storm. I hired a moving company, not to pack, but to help me sort. I was ruthless. I walked through each room, not with the sad nostalgia of a woman leaving her home, but with the sharp eye of a curator choosing what was truly priceless. Frank's armchair, where he read the paper every morning. The box of family photos that hadn't been on the mantel. The sturdy oak headboard he built for our bed. My gardening tools. A few books. My wedding china. Everything else was just stuff. I told the movers to take the scarred coffee table, the stained sofas, the ruined rugs, and all the other furniture and dump it. I let the new owner, the flipper, deal with the rest. He was gutting the place anyway. My trash was his problem now. When the closing was complete and the check was in my bank account, a sum that was more than enough to ensure I would be comfortable for the rest of my days, I didn't look back. I had already found a small, modern 2-bedroom condo in a building with a pool and a gym overlooking a quiet park. It was clean, bright, and blessedly new. There were no ghosts here, no memories to be desecrated. I spent the first week unpacking the few treasures I had brought with me. I placed the photo of Frank and me on our wedding day on a new, sleek bookshelf. I arranged my mother's unbroken possessions, the few things that had been in my bedroom, safe from the rampage, on the mantelpiece. The room was smaller, but it was filled only with things that mattered. It was all legacy, no baggage. I haven't spoken to David or Susan since that final phone call. I heard through my sister that they tried to contest the sale, that they consulted a lawyer who told them they didn't have a leg to stand on. The house was mine, and my decision was legally sound. They had slandered me around town, telling anyone who would listen that I was a vindictive, senile old woman who had robbed her own son. But the people who knew me, the people who knew what Frank and I had built, knew the truth. They knew that I wasn't the one who had robbed anybody. Today, I was sitting on my new balcony, sipping a cup of tea. I could see people walking their dogs in the park below. I had joined a water aerobics class. I was thinking of taking a cruise to Alaska next summer. I was free. Selling the house wasn't an act of revenge, it was an act of liberation. It was a declaration that I was not just a placeholder in my own life, a custodian of someone else's future inheritance. I was the author of my own story, right up to the final chapter. They thought they were just wrecking a house. They had no idea they were really building me a new life, one where respect wasn't something I had to beg my own family for, but something I demanded simply by respecting myself. They wanted the house, but they didn't want the home. So I kept the memories that made it a home and sold the rest. After all, it was just stuff.